The desperate summons, the crystal spires of luminous prime, trembled as another wave of crimson swarm ships passed overhead. High Counselor Lyrian pressed her delicate blue hands against the viewing portal, watching the sky burn with alien fire. The once peaceful capital of the Zephyrian Alliance had become a fortress under siege, its beautiful gardens now cratered wastelands. How many worlds have we lost? She asked without turning from the window. Ambassador Ketlin consulted his data tablet with shaking fingers. His normally pristine white robes were stained with dust and worry. 17 systems in the last cycle, High Counselor. The swarm moved faster than we can evacuate. The war room behind them buzzed with desperate activity. Military advisors from 6 different species worked frantically at holographic displays, their faces showing the strain of fighting an enemy they could not understand. The Crimson Swarm had appeared from the void 3 months ago, consuming everything in their path with terrifying efficiency. General Crix, a towering reptilian warrior, slammed his clawed fist on the strategic table. Our fleets are useless against them. Every ship we send is either destroyed or converted to their cause. They're not just conquering us, they're absorbing us. The swarm was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They consumed technology, biology, and even energy itself, growing stronger with each victory. Their ships were living things that could adapt and evolve mid-battle. Traditional warfare meant nothing against an enemy that learned from every encounter. High Counselor Lyrian finally turned from the window, her ethereal features marked by exhaustion. The Zephyrians were a peaceful species, known throughout the galaxy for their diplomatic skills and philosophical wisdom. They had spent centuries building bridges between warring civilizations, creating the alliance that now faced extinction. What about the ancient texts from the Void Temple? She asked quietly. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what she was referring to, but no one wanted to speak of it. Deep beneath the capital, archaeologists had recently discovered ruins predating their civilization by millions of years. Among the artifacts was a device that the ancient writings called the Dimensional Caller. Professor Elm, the Alliance's chief xenarchaeologist, stepped forward nervously. His insectoid features twitched with anxiety as he spoke. High Counselor, the translations are unclear, but the device appears to be capable of reaching across dimensional barriers. The ancients used it to summon help from other realities. And what kind of help did they receive? General Crix asked suspiciously. The records are damaged, but there are references to warriors from the Death Realm and beings of endless conflict. The warnings are extensive, speaking of entities that knew only war and destruction. Ambassador Ketlin shuddered at the description. We're a peaceful civilization. How could we possibly control beings that live for battle? We might be inviting something worse than the swarm. The debate that followed revealed the deep philosophical divide within the Alliance. Some argued for evacuation to the Outer Rim, abandoning their core worlds to save what population they could. Others pushed for a final conventional assault, throwing everything they had at the swarm in one desperate battle. But Lyrian could see the truth in the tactical displays. Their military strength was barely 1/10 of what the swarm had already absorbed. Every day brought new reports of converted Alliance ships joining the enemy fleet. Soon, they would be fighting their own technology turned against them. Show me the device, she said finally. The journey to the Void Temple took them deep beneath the planet's surface, through tunnels carved by a civilization that had faced its own extinction eons ago. The walls were covered with warning symbols, in languages that predated Galactic Standard. Even with their advanced translation technology, the meaning was chillingly clear. The Dimensional Caller stood in the center of a vast chamber, its crystalline structure humming with dormant energy. It was beautiful and terrible, shaped like a spiral galaxy, with thousands of delicate arms reaching toward a central core. Ancient power conduits snaked across the floor, connecting to energy sources that Professor Elm admitted he didn't fully understand. The activation sequence requires 3 conditions, Elm explained as technicians prepared the ancient systems. First, the caller must be facing extinction with no hope of conventional victory. Second, those who operate it must be willing to accept any consequence of their summons. Third, they must offer something of equal value to what they hope to receive. Lyrian studied the device with growing dread. What did the ancients offer? Their entire civilization, Elm replied quietly. According to the fragments we've translated, they summoned their help and then vanished from history. We found no other traces of them anywhere in the galaxy. The implications hung heavy in the chamber air. Using the dimensional caller might save them from the swarm, but at the cost of everything they were as a people. It was a bargain with forces beyond their understanding, one that might leave them as empty as their ancient predecessors. Outside, the swarm continued its relentless advance. Long-range sensors showed the main fleet approaching their final defensive line. Within hours, Luminous Prime itself would come under direct assault. The choice was no longer between salvation and destruction, but between 2 different kinds of ending. Lyrian looked around at her advisors, seeing her own desperation reflected in their faces. They were scholars, diplomats, and artists who had never wanted to make such terrible decisions. But history had thrust leadership upon them, and now they carried the weight of their entire civilization's future. "Activate the device," she ordered. The dimensional caller began to glow as power flowed through circuits that had been dormant for millions of years. Energy patterns danced across its crystalline surface, while space itself seemed to bend around the ancient mechanism. Reality groaned under the strain as dimensional barriers that had never been crossed suddenly found themselves under assault. The first signs of success came as tears in the fabric of space-time, small rifts that showed glimpses of other realities. Through the growing openings, they could see distant stars and unfamiliar constellations. But something was wrong. The readings showed massive objects moving toward their dimensional barriers, far larger than individual warriors. "High Counselor," the chief technician called out in alarm, "we're detecting entire fleets approaching the dimensional gateway. These aren't individual champions. These are full military armadas." The chamber shook as the dimensional rifts widened beyond their intended parameters. Whatever civilization they had contacted clearly thought on a scale that dwarfed anything in their galaxy. The energy signatures were unlike anything in their databases, powered by technologies they could not begin to comprehend. Through the largest rift, they caught their first glimpse of the respondents to their call. Ships emerged that were brutal in their efficiency, scarred by countless battles and bristling with weapons. These vessels bore no resemblance to the elegant curves of Alliance design. They were tools of war, built by beings who understood conflict in ways the peaceful Alliance never could. The lead ship was massive, its hull showing signs of countless repairs and modifications. Gun ports lined its flanks like the eyes of some predatory beast, while sensor arrays swept the area with obvious military precision. This was not the ship of explorers or diplomats. This was a warship, designed and crewed by those who lived for battle. A communication signal reached them, transmitted on frequencies that their equipment could barely process. The translation systems struggled with linguistic patterns that seemed based on concepts of conflict and survival. When the message finally came through, it was spoken in a voice that carried the weight of countless battles. "This is Admiral Sarah Mitchell of the Terran Expeditionary Fleet. We received your dimensional distress call and have responded with available forces. Please identify yourselves and state the nature of your emergency." Terran. The word meant nothing to their linguistic databases. These beings called themselves by a name that roughly translated to Earth Dwellers or Groundborn. As more ships emerged from the dimensional rifts, The Alliance representatives realized they were witnessing the arrival of an entire military fleet from another reality. Professor Elm worked frantically to establish proper communication protocols while the Terran ships took defensive positions around Luminous Prime. Their movements were precise and coordinated, showing a level of military discipline that impressed even General Crix. These beings knew war in ways the Alliance had never imagined. The first face-to-face meeting took place aboard the lead Terran vessel, hastily arranged as the swarm continued its approach. High Counselor Lyrian and her advisors were transported to the human ship using technology that made their own seem primitive by comparison. The interior of the Terran vessel was a study in functional brutality. Every surface was designed for maximum efficiency during combat operations. The corridors were wide enough for armed personnel to move quickly, and blast doors could seal sections of the ship in seconds. This was clearly a people who had learned to fight and survive under the worst possible conditions. Asterisk. Admiral Mitchell greeted them in a conference room that doubled as a tactical planning center. She was a woman of perhaps 50 years, her face bearing scars that spoke of personal combat experience. Her uniform was practical rather than decorative, designed for someone who expected to face danger personally rather than directing it from a safe distance. "We've been monitoring your situation since we arrived," Mitchell began without ceremony. "Your people are facing extinction from an adaptive enemy force that learns from each encounter. Our analysts estimate you have perhaps 6 hours before your final defensive line collapses." The directness of her assessment shocked the Alliance delegation. They were accustomed to diplomatic language that softened harsh realities. These humans spoke of war and death as casually as others might discuss weather patterns. "We offer our most advanced technologies and territorial rights in exchange for military assistance," Lyrian said, trying to maintain some semblance of traditional negotiation. Mitchell studied the offered data with professional interest, but her expression remained neutral. "Your technology is impressive in many areas, but your military applications are severely limited. You've designed your civilization around the assumption that rational beings can resolve conflicts through negotiation. And you believe otherwise?" Ambassador Ketlin asked, somewhat offended by the implication. "We know otherwise," Mitchell replied grimly. "We come from a world where survival required constant adaptation to hostile environments and predatory competition. We fought wars against enemies that showed no mercy and made no compromises. We understand what you're facing because we faced it ourselves." The humans shared their own tactical analysis of the swarm, revealing insights that had escaped Alliance military thinkers. They identified weaknesses in enemy formation patterns and predicted adaptive responses to conventional attacks. It became clear that these Terrans possessed military knowledge gained through harsh experience rather than theoretical study. As alarms sounded throughout the ship, long-range sensors detected the swarm's main fleet entering the system. The final battle for the Alliance was about to begin, and their fate now rested in the hands of warriors from another dimension, who fought like demons and showed mercy to no enemy. The dimensional gamble had succeeded, but whether it would bring salvation or merely a different kind of destruction remained to be seen. Asterisk. When Deathworlders answer the call, the battle for Luminous Prime began at dawn, though the sky was so filled with ships that natural light barely penetrated the atmosphere. Admiral Mitchell stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching tactical displays that showed the approaching Crimson Swarm in all its terrible glory. The enemy fleet stretched across space like a living plague, each ship pulsing with stolen energy from conquered worlds. "All units, this is Admiral Mitchell," she broadcast across both human and Alliance frequencies. "Today, we face an enemy that has never known defeat. They've consumed 17 civilizations and show no signs of slowing down. But they've never faced humans before. General Crix monitored the communication from his own command ship, marveling at the confidence in the human commander's voice. The Alliance had lost every major engagement against the Swarm. Yet these dimensional warriors spoke as if victory was certain rather than hoped for. The first phase of battle revealed the vast difference between human and Alliance tactical thinking. While the Zephyrian fleet formed elegant defensive formations around their homeworld, the human ships scattered across the system in seemingly random patterns. To Alliance observers, it looked like chaos rather than strategy. Commander Elena Rodriguez led the first human strike, taking her squadron directly into the heart of the Swarm formation. Her ships moved with predatory grace, targeting not the largest enemy vessels, but the communication nodes that coordinated Swarm activities. Within minutes, entire sections of the enemy fleet began operating independently rather than as a unified force. Focus fire on the biomechanical interfaces, Rodriguez ordered her pilots. These things adapt by sharing information. Cut there. Neural networks, and they become individual targets instead of a collective intelligence. The Swarm's response was swift and violent. Converted Alliance ships turned their weapons on Rodriguez's squadron, using familiar technology in ways the original builders had never intended. But the humans had studied the tactical data during their brief preparation period, identifying weaknesses that their Alliance allies had never noticed. Captain James Park commanded the destroyer Relentless, leading his crew through maneuvers that seemed impossible to Alliance observers. His ship dove through debris fields and used gravitational slingshots around planetary bodies, turning the battlefield environment into a tactical advantage. When Swarm interceptors pursued him through an asteroid belt, he detonated mining charges that created a devastating particle storm. "That's not how space combat works," General Crix muttered, watching human ships perform maneuvers that violated every principle of civilized warfare. "It is if you're trying to win," Admiral Mitchell replied calmly. "We don't fight wars to prove our superiority. We fight them to survive." The turning point came when the Swarm deployed their most terrifying weapon, the conversion matrix, a massive biomechanical construct that could transform entire fleets in minutes. It had been responsible for turning dozens of Alliance ships into enemy vessels, growing the Swarm's strength with each victory. Professor Elm watched in horror as the Matrix began its work on a squadron of Zephyrian cruisers. The elegant vessels writhed and twisted as alien biology merged with their hulls, turning familiar technology into something monstrous. Within minutes, the converted ships turned their weapons on their former allies, but the humans had been studying the Matrix's operation patterns. Captain Lisa Chun commanded the stealth cruiser Ghost Protocol, specially modified for deep reconnaissance missions. As the conversion matrix focused on its latest victims, Chun's ship slipped through its defenses using sensor-dampening technology that made it nearly invisible. "Matrix core identified," Chun reported. "Beginning surgical strike." What followed was a masterclass in precision warfare that left their Alliance allies speechless. Instead of attacking the Matrix directly, Chun's team targeted the biological support systems that kept the construct alive. Explosive charges placed at critical junction points severed neural pathways that had taken the Swarm months to grow. The Matrix's death scream echoed across dimensional frequencies, causing every Swarm ship in the system to convulse in shared agony. For the first time since the war began, the enemy showed weakness instead of unstoppable adaptation. But the cost was terrible. Chun's ship was caught in the Matrix's death throes, crushed by biomechanical tentacles as the construct collapsed. In on itself, High Counselor Lyrian watched the sacrifice with tears streaming down her face. She died to save people she'd never met, fighting for a cause that wasn't her own. "That's what humans do," Admiral Mitchell replied grimly. "We die for each other, for strangers, for ideas we believe in. It's not always rational, but it's what makes us dangerous to our enemies. The battle's second phase began as the swarm adapted to human tactics. The alien collective mind analyzed captured data from destroyed human ships, beginning to counter the irregular strategies that had initially confused them. Enemy formations tightened, communication networks redundantly multiplied, and attack patterns became more unpredictable. But the humans had expected this adaptation. Commander Rodriguez regrouped her surviving fighters for a desperate gambit that would have been impossible with Alliance technology. Using modified FTL drives as weapons, her squadron performed microjumps directly into enemy formations, materializing inside swarm ships and detonating their reactors. The tactic was devastating, but suicidal. Rodriguez's entire squadron was lost in the attack, but they took out the swarm's primary command cluster. Suddenly, thousands of enemy ships found themselves operating without central coordination, reverting to individual hunting behaviors that made them vulnerable to concentrated fire. General Crix found himself adapting human tactics to his own forces, abandoning centuries of military doctrine in favor of survival. His cruisers began using ramming attacks and self-destruct sequences, tactics that would have been considered barbaric weeks earlier. The desperation of their situation had forced even peaceful civilizations to embrace the brutal mathematics of total war. Asterisk. The final phase began when long-range sensors detected the approach of the Swarm Queen herself. The massive bioship dwarfed everything else in the system, its hull pulsing with the consumed essence of entire civilizations. This was the creature that had orchestrated the galactic conquest, the collective intelligence that drove the swarm's relentless expansion. Admiral Mitchell studied the tactical readings with professional interest rather than fear. All human ships fall back to defensive positions around Luminous Prime. Alliance vessels maintain current patrol patterns. We're going to let her come to us. The Queen's arrival changed the fundamental nature of the battle. Her presence caused all swarm units to fight with renewed coordination and viciousness. But it also created a single point of failure that human strategists had been hoping to exploit. Everything the swarm had learned, every adaptation they had made, was stored within the Queen's massive neural matrix. Captain David Morrison commanded the heavy cruiser Defiant, one of the most heavily armed vessels in the human fleet. His ship had been selected for a mission that everyone understood was suicidal. Using the Queen's own size against her, Morrison would pilot his vessel directly into her biomechanical brain while his crew detonated every weapon system simultaneously. "This is defiant to all ships," Morrison broadcast as he began his final approach. "It's been an honor serving with you. Take care of each other, and remember us when you're telling stories to your grandchildren." The Queen's defensive systems focused on the approaching human ship, recognizing the threat it represented. Biomechanical tentacles lashed out like living weapons, while energy beams tried to vaporize the Defiant before it could reach its target. Morrison's crew worked frantically to keep their ship operational, rerouting power around damaged systems, and manually targeting weapons that should have been computer-controlled. But the real genius of the human plan wasn't Morrison's sacrifice alone. While the Queen focused on the obvious threat, stealth teams led by Marine Colonel Sarah Kim infiltrated the bioship through wounds created by earlier attacks. Using personal teleportation devices, they materialized inside the Queen's neural center and began planting high-yield explosives at critical junction points. The Queen's death was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Her final scream shattered dimensional barriers, sending psychic shockwaves across multiple realities. Every swarm ship in the galaxy suddenly found itself disconnected from the collective intelligence that had driven their expansion. Individual units began attacking each other, their programming corrupted by the Queen's violent death dot in the aftermath of victory. The survivors gathered aboard what remained of their fleets. The costs had been terrible for both sides. Half the human fleet was gone, along with most of the Alliance's remaining military forces. But the swarm was broken, its survivors fleeing into deep space without coordination or purpose. High Counselor Lyrian met with Admiral Mitchell in the ruins of the Zephyrian capital, walking through gardens that had been battlefields hours earlier. The contrast between their peoples had never been clearer. The Alliance represented the heights of peaceful civilization, while the humans embodied survival through strength and sacrifice. "Your people fought like demons," Lyrian said quietly. "You showed no mercy, took terrible risks, and sacrificed everything for victory. I don't understand how beings capable of such violence can also be capable of such heroism." Mitchell surveyed the devastated city with eyes that had seen too many battlefields. "We come from a world that tried to kill us every day. Predators, diseases, natural disasters, and our own violent impulses. We learned to fight because we had to, but we also learned to protect those who couldn't fight for themselves." The humans had revealed something about their origins during the battle, sharing data about their homeworld that explained their incredible military capabilities. Earth was what xenobiologists call the death world, a planet so hostile that only the most adaptable species could survive there. Humans had evolved under constant threat, developing intelligence and technology as weapons against an environment that showed no mercy. "You're offering us an alliance," Lyrian realized, "not as conquerors or saviors, but as equals." "We're offering you friendship," Mitchell corrected. "Your people have something we've never had, the ability to build civilizations that last for millennia without destroying themselves. We have something you need, the knowledge of how to survive when friendship and diplomacy aren't enough." The new alliance that formed in the following months was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human military advisors worked alongside Alliance scientists, while Zephyrian diplomats helped establish peaceful contact with human colony worlds. The contrast in their approaches created innovations that neither species could have achieved. A lone dot construction began on joint defense stations throughout Alliance space, combining human military technology with alien scientific advancement. The designs were revolutionary, creating installations that could both defend against military threats and serve as centers of learning and cultural exchange. Professor Elm established the first interdimensional studies program, working with human physicists to better understand the technology that had brought them together. The research revealed that their two realities were naturally connected through quantum entanglement, suggesting that their meeting had been destiny rather than accident. General Crix found himself studying human military academies, learning tactical concepts that challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare. But he also taught human officers about the importance of proportional response and post-conflict reconstruction, showing them how to win wars without losing their humanity. The memorial service for the fallen was held on both worlds simultaneously, connected by the same dimensional technology that had brought them together. Human and Alliance families mourned their dead together, finding comfort in shared grief and mutual respect. The ceremony established traditions that would be honored for generations to come. As the first anniversary of the battle approached, delegations from both species gathered to sign the Treaty of Mutual Defense. The document established not just military cooperation, but cultural exchange programs, joint scientific research initiatives, and shared exploration missions to other dimensions. Admiral Mitchell, now bearing the title of Interdimensional Fleet Commander, stood before representatives of two civilizations as she delivered the treaty's closing words. "We came from different realities, shaped by different struggles. But we've learned that strength and wisdom are both necessary for survival. Together, we can face any threat the universe sends our way." The dimensional gate remained active, serving as a permanent bridge between human and Alliance space. Ships traveled regularly between realities, carrying goods, knowledge, and people who had chosen to build new lives in alien worlds. The connection that had begun in desperation had become the foundation for a new kind of civilization. In the end, the Alliance's desperate gamble had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. They had called for help and received not just salvation, but transformation. The Deathworlders had answered their call, bringing with them the gifts of strength and sacrifice that would ensure both species survived, whatever challenges the future might hold. Asterisk.